Petros Chrysafis. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't butcher the name too much there.
You're right. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so you're joining me from California. Whereabouts in California?
So the Central Valley of California, it's like the part of California that not a whole lot of people know. So if you're not familiar with it, it goes from Sacramento all the way down to Bakersfield, and I'm bam smack in the middle in Fresno. So
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Have you always been there, or have you moved around the U.S.?
No, I came to the U.S. 5 years ago, and I've always been around this part. So this is where I moved in with my wife, and this is where she's from. So just kind of lived around here for the last 5 years.
Cool. Nice and sunny, I'm sure.
Actually, 6 years now. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
too sunny.
I
But
see.
yeah,
I see. I'm having you on the show because you're a human wildlife conflict specialist. That's a mouthful. You're also the
yep.
founder of Predator Detection, which is right up my alley. I'm originally from Northern Ontario, so I was born and bred in the woods, with moose and deer and wolves and
hmm
lynx and all those
Oh, so
fun
jealous.
animals.
So jealous. Yeah.
Why are you jealous?
We don't have. Well, we have some wolves in California, but not only one of them in my backyard officially so far. And no lynx, obviously. We've got bobcats, no moose. So,
Right. But you
I
got deer.
like the North America animals, and I like the North America animals a lot. So,
Right. Well, it's funny because my partner and I are moving to Prince Edward Island, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with Canada, but
hmm
that's an island in the Atlantic on the East Coast, and there are no predators other than coyotes. There's essentially nothing. There's no wolves, there's no deer, no moose, no bears, no porcupine.
wow.
It's just coyote country, and that's it. And I guess they eat all the rabbits and
Yeah, that makes
you know.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be definitely weird to not see, like, bear prints. That's gonna be a little bizarre. So I need to know, like, 'cause I've always thought that was a cool job to do predator detection and all
hmm
that stuff. How did you come about before we get started? Because I wanna know, like, were you just somebody, like, a nerd who grew up in the forest? You were comfortable there? How did you come about?
So it's predator detection and deterrence, and we'll talk about the deterrence part as well. Um,
Yes.
but I grew up in the island of Cyprus, so it's an island in the Mediterranean. We don't have a whole lot of predators, and we have some woods, but not anywhere near the extent of like what people think about, like in forests. Originally, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and then my dad is like, "Okay, you want to be a marine biologist?" Because I wanted to work with whales. So he's like, "Let's go talk to a marine biologist, and you can see what it's like." And that completely put me off being a marine biologist. Uh, yeah,
Why?
I mean,
I'm just curious.
so
I'm
it's
just curious.
no offense or anything to anyone who is a marine biologist, clearly, but I thought it was all about to do with whales and stuff. I was really young, and I thought
Right.
everyone is like swimming with sharks and whales and stuff, and the reality of the profession and the reality of the science is much different than what I had in mind. So I was kind of like I was a little down. So I was like, I don't want to work with shrimp. I don't want to work with like mussels and oysters.
Right.
And so my dad suggested, hey, you know what? You like animals, so go be a zoologist. It encompasses all animals, so you can until you find something that you want to be, you can specialize in all animals. And so while you were there in school, you poke around and you find out what you want to find out. And um, during that time, I just kind of like I worked hard on trying to pinpoint what I wanted. And for me, it was killer whales were like my big draw, right, into the dolphins and the whales. And so I realized actually I like predators a lot. It's not just killer whales. Like I like all predators a lot. And then, I'm like, I like social predators a lot more than I like solitary predators. And it just kind of moved into me being like, okay, I'll just try and do terrestrial predators instead of marine predators. And I kind of wanted to do a lot of wolf work in the you know in my future. That sort of panned out. I did some wolf behavior work and stuff like that, but I came to the U.S. I was like, yeah, I'll get a master's degree here, and then we'll move from there. And yeah, I don't know if I've ever felt like I feel comfortable in nature. I guess it's just not like not too comfortable, but I like it. So like if
Right.
you throw me into the woods, I enjoy it. You throw me into the desert, I enjoy it to some extent, depending on how hot it is. But like everything is just has its own beauty in it, and so like I learn to enjoy what I can from every habitat and every biome that I'm in.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can
Hmm.
totally appreciate that too. You mentioned very quickly here, solitary versus social predators. When
Hmm.
I think of that, I think of things like wolf packs.
Hmm.
So what are some examples of social versus solitary predators?
Well, I mean, you obviously have your wolf packs, and you obviously have your coyote packs. And so that those are the ones that I tend to gravitate with, because there isn't just the layer of predation. There's a lot more to it. There's their intersocial reactions, the territorial disputes, and all that stuff. And you've got solitary ones. In this case, you've got bobcats and mountain lions, which are the felines. Usually are a lot more solitary. Interestingly enough, we're finding out that that's not necessarily the case. They may be more solitary hunters than they are anything else. But there's a lot of research now to show that mountain lions, get together and talk and share meals and stuff like that. So it's always like you have this gross oversimplification of what the animal world is like when you're an undergraduate, and then the more you start, getting experience, and then you move on to your graduate, you're like, oh, it's not all entirely like clear cut as it used to be, right? So
Right.
um, yeah, I mean that's the ones that at least in North America just strike out of me. Uh,
Do you know if a lynx is a solitary?
Yeah, yeah, they're
Yeah.
fairly solitary creatures. They get together
Okay.
during mating, and the mom stays with the kittens for a while until it's time for the kittens to move on. I
And
think
bears too, right?
bears are interesting. I think it really depends on where you are. In my cameras, where I set up cameras and stuff, I usually find that the mom bear is followed by either last year's cubs or this year's cubs, but she's always being followed by someone. So I think mama bears, at least in my neck of the woods, don't usually have a whole lot of solitary life.
Okay.
Maybe a couple of months a year, but not a whole lot. So I don't know. I mean, they definitely hunt in a solitary manner if you consider them hunting, but they don't necessarily like all they forage. They probably do with someone else next to them. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because I've always wondered, like, and I would imagine when I think California, I think, bobcats. And when I think British Columbia, I think grizzly bears. And there is this aspect of predatory grizzly bears as opposed to the kind of more tame black bears you have in
Hmm.
Ontario and the East Coast. Do you guys track any grizzlies in California?
Well, so the really interesting thing, right? I mean, California doesn't have any grizzly bears.
Okay.
It hasn't had grizzly bears for hundreds of years now. But the interesting thing about it is that California was prime grizzly country, right? So the area, what you consider in your head as being California, is a lot of the lowlands in particular had grizzlies in them. They had elk, they had all these animals that were present in the landscape, and they weren't in like small numbers either. But there's a huge change. The Central Valley, if you Google images of it, it's mostly just farmland, right? It tends to be dry. It tends to be like you all the pictures that you see is arid dirt, stuff like that. But it was one of the biggest wetlands in California and so forth in the West. So it's really really bizarre to think about the fact that 500, 600 years ago, the very area that I was walking on this morning was wet, and not just like a little bit, like permanently wet. So but we don't have grizzlies in our neck of the
Okay.
woods. I think the closest ones are somewhere in south and northeast Washington, and obviously Idaho, but not anywhere near here.
And
Um,
I have to ask about this because this is something that's being discussed a lot, especially in
mhm.
mainstream media, is the aspect of wild pigs. That's something that's there
Oh
seems
yeah.
to be quite a few moving north. I'm not sure about California, so and since your knowledge is probably mostly limited to California, but I am curious to see if you've heard of any issues with them.
Oh yeah, we have tons,
Oh yeah.
tons of wild pigs. we have both the feral pig and also wild boar as a species in and of itself, right? So there's a
What's the
difference.
difference? Yeah.
The wild boar are a species of pig that's in Europe that is a wild species of pig. And whereas the feral pigs were domesticated pigs that are let loose into the landscape, and through time, if you look at pigs, you think of your little pink piggy, and you release them into the woods, their next generation gets a little bit tougher skin and like darker colors and more hair, and per generation that goes by, they tend to get a lot more feral looking. So you get a resemblance of what looks like a very scraggly boar, that looks like that, but that's a feral pig versus the wild boar species that you would technically see.
Okay.
Um, it's always tricky, and I think both of them definitely interbreed when they have the opportunity. So like it's not always cut and dry, but we've had both. So we had feral pigs, and there's also been wild boar that were brought in here to hunt in the past. They were brought in by
Right.
I think it was Spanish missionaries or some sort of colonizer, rather. Conquistadors. I'm not entirely sure who brought them, but they were brought here. Um, our habitat, especially the foothills, are very, very welcoming to them because we have a lot of acorns that drop. And we have a lot of oak, and so they love to just go around and eating all the acorn that's around there, and a lot of the berry bushes. So
And they can
and
be
they
pretty fierce animals, like,
yeah.
they can be quite threatening to humans. I
Hmm.
remember, visiting Portugal and walking along the beach, and I saw pig tracks, and I said to my Portuguese friend, I said, "I think there might be some boars around here." And she said, "Oh, we should get away from the area because this can be dangerous." And I looked, sure enough, I looked just at the edge of the forest, and there was a family of them. And I thought, to me, I was like, "This is really cool because there's
Right.
none around here." But yeah, we definitely got away from there because we thought, "Well, okay, this could be dangerous."
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely dangerous. In California, the idea is to shoot them on sight, right? You
Wow.
can get, if you have a hunting license, you can get a pig tag. So it's like 16, $15 or $20 to have a tag that lets you kill pigs. And if you're a landowner and you've had issues with them, you can file for a depredation permit, and then you get given the permit to walk out and just shoot as many pigs as you can find, within a certain time frame to reduce the damage that they do. So when it comes to like lethal measures and non-lethal measures, I try and use non-lethal measures for the predators, but for pigs that are invasive, it's well, partially because non-lethal measures don't work, but also yeah, it's all lethal work. So
And they can reproduce really quickly. I remember
mhm,
reading, again, it's in the mainstream media right now, but they can reproduce extremely quickly. And
yeah,
I was reading that Texas has a huge problem where they're reproducing faster than they can cull them. So I would imagine, yeah, I mean, this is why I brought it up because it's such a problem. And I think it's going to be a bigger problem in the future.
yeah, they're very adapted. They reproduce very quickly, and very few predators frequently mess with them. So whilst bears and mountain lions will take adults every now and then, coyotes might get little piglets, right? They don't have, so in Europe, wild boar are a little smaller, and they can get more predated on by wolves. So there are wolf packs that, especially in Italy and in the Mediterranean, the wild boar packs, the wild wolf packs are specializing in taking down boar. They know what they're doing, whereas over here we don't have predators that have specialized in taking down boar. So everyone that does it is kind of like opportunistic, or testing the waters. But I haven't heard yet of any particular animal that says this is all I'm going to be eating is, wild pig. So
Right. I'm sure maybe with time they'll evolve and climate change and all this kind of drying will
yeah,
move populations around and all that jazz. But I did eat wild boar in Portugal. It was pretty tasty, I have to
yeah,
say. I imagine the boar that people are able to hunt in California, they can also eat.
yeah, definitely. I've had wild boar in Austria, where I did, We caught one and we shot it because it was doing a lot of damage to the area. I've had wild pig here. It's not as good as wild boar. A lot of the pig in general, a lot of the omnivore flavor comes about where what they've been eating. So if they're feeding on natural like corn, hazelnuts, or nuts in general and stuff, they have a better taste flavor than animals that just feed on whatever they find,
Right.
which could
Right.
be like carcasses, it could be rotten meat, trash, it could be all sorts of things. So it's not necessarily always good.
That's
Um,
true.
I know that there's some programs right now in California where if they do widespread, so they have like eradication days where if they do eradication days, the meat from those animals goes to homeless shelters. So it
Okay.
gets processed on the spot, and some of the cuts get taken to homeless shelters for cooking because it can make for really good stews. It can make for really good food like that, but not necessarily like a barbecue or a pit roast or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, it's not gonna be the tastiest ham, but it's gonna
exactly.
be good enough for a good stew, that's for sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like if you have no food, you'll take some of the least tastier
Right.
food if it's food, right? So in the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
a benefit situation. So yeah.
Exactly. What I find really interesting about what you do is that you do this from your own company. You don't do
Hmm.
this for the government.
Mm-mm.
So I find that really interesting because I don't know how it works in Canada, but I've never heard of a predator specialist in Canada that didn't work for the government. I don't know if it's a government domain, but I find it really cool that you decided to just set up shop instead. Is there a reason why you did that instead of going to work for the government?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. Well, so the human wildlife conflict field is one that's like relatively new, right? And it's expanding. Like at least in the U.S., it used to be predominantly in areas where endangered species were present. So wolves, in particular, you couldn't go out and shoot wolves, right? It was illegal to do it. So they had to have people who would specialize in going out and talking to the ranchers and either eventually leading to the shooting of the wolves, but also setting up measures that deterred wolves from the livestock and stuff like that. So it started with the federal government, and there's more state jobs now. Uh, Honestly, one of the reasons why I did it is because I didn't have the job anywhere else. Like there wasn't anyone hiring. This started off as a simple like project situation where I helped a bunch of friends, that I knew, help them deal with like their livestock depredations, and then it kind of escalated. And I said, okay, I need to put a name down for this. I need to make this official, so A, it looks okay on the resume, right? And B, there is some legal and some legal constraints and some things that may, if they pop up, I have some protection rather than just being someone who is just walking around on people's properties putting devices that make loud noises or whatever. So there was a need to formalize everything before anything happened that would backfire on me. Um,
Yeah, that's a very smart move. I mean, I
mhm.
myself am incorporated, so I
Yeah,
love it when people start their own thing as a way to create their own careers.
yeah.
I think that's really neat. Do you watch the TV show, Yellowstone?
I have not. No, not yet.
Okay, it's one of my new favorite shows. I just started watching it. I
Yeah.
marathon watched the first 3 seasons, but it's great because it shows ranch life, and it also
Hmm.
does deal with the wolves, being predators around the cows that these guys are raising, and that they always have this one cowboy in charge of deterrence and all that stuff, and I've always found that fascinating, like, and they usually pick this cowboy who's just in tune with how wolves behave and all
Right.
this stuff, and he's the person who, during, I guess, the seasonal run, makes sure that the wolves don't eat the cows, especially the baby cows.
Right.
So do you get called for jobs like that? Like, do ranches and farms call you?
Yeah. So one of the advantages of being that kind of emerged as its own positive accidentally, but one of the advantages of being independent is that you're not associated with the government, and so there's a lot of distrust of the government recently. In popular media and a lot of all these
Right.
things. So when you're a rancher and you don't have anyone to turn to, you don't want to turn into to the government because you don't trust them for whatever reason. But you also usually a lot of these people don't want to turn to wildlife advocate groups, right? Because they also don't trust them. So being independent offered me the ability of me walking up to people and saying, I have nothing to gain out of this. I just want to help you, right? And here's how I want to help you with the way that I think science, benefits you. So this is what the best science says. This is what the most recent science says. This is what we're gonna do. So I get calls from farms and ranches. Usually now it's up to this point it's been medium sized operations. Like I haven't had anything like really big. Um, I think the biggest one was about 200 sheep, 250 sheep, I think, or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's just like cows are the ones that are like kind of hard to get into, I think. Mostly because adult cows don't really have a whole lot of predation, right? But if you have sheep or goats grazing in a national forest, you're basically ringing the doorbell for like every single the dinner bell for every single predator that's out there, right? So they have a lot more issues with depredation. So they want to get more people involved and deal with it. So
You see a
yeah.
lot of people, at least around, Ottawa, where I'm recording from, um, a lot of sheep farms and goat farms
Mhm.
have llamas, and they
Mhm.
have these, sheepdogs or whatever. Do those tend to be a good form of, deterrence, or do you sometimes have to go one step further?
Livestock guardian dogs are great, right? If you do it properly, I've just been starting to get into it in the past maybe 9 months. Before that, I was using a lot of electronics, but I know that for a fact the dogs work better. It's just a matter of getting into it, getting the people accustomed with what you need to do. Getting the puppies or the dogs raised and bonded with the cattle. There's a lot of cost up front, so it's not for everyone, right? Especially if you're going to buy a breed dog, because you can't just go out and adopt a dog from a shelter, right? So there's certain costs associated with it. But I think the dogs in particular are really good. Um, there's a whole psyche of creating a fear landscape for a predator, and I think the dogs do that very very well. The llamas and the alpacas and stuff. It's really cute, and I like to see them. Right, I've seen people use emus as well. Um, they work to an extent. So like the llamas and the alpacas will work on canines because coyotes and wolves historically have not encountered this species before. So you'd always like even and this is not obviously this isn't scientifically proven, but I think that um, instinctually you don't know how to react to something that you don't have a life history with, right? But I think mutt lions, I've seen them kill, or I've seen killed alpacas by mutt lions, and I think that the animal, since it ranges from the north to the South Americas, I think there's something instinctually that lets them say, okay, this could be potential prey. So I think they work, but I also tell people that if you're going to keep like a guard llama or a guard alpaca or whatever, try and add something else into the mix to keep the lions away. Because the lions will be
Okay.
deterred at the beginning, maybe, but eventually they will probably die,
They'll
or they will
probably
probably.
just well, I mean, I would imagine they would just study, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
would think they're smart enough for that.
I mean, there's a lot that goes on into like each livestock depredation event, right? And most often than not, these animals aren't just they don't just wake up one day and go, you know what I want today, lamb, right? There's usually some outside force that is pushing them towards going and attacking livestock. It's not always just a simple like okay decision process. So part of my job is to go out and try and find those factors and see what caused this effect. Is it something that's going to keep going? Is it something that it was a one-off and likely not going to be a problem anymore? And you just have to do a lot of like looking into the habitat, hopefully get some images or some videos of the animals themselves so you can decipher some behavior and stuff like that. There's a lot of like CSI work that goes into it almost. I
Well,
think
that
it.
was I guess that leads me to my next question then, which is how does that process even work? Like, let's say I own a sheep farm, let's say, 200 sheep. A few of them I've lost to coyotes, or what I think are coyotes. It might be wolves or it might be lions. How do you even start with that?
Well, if I told you my trade secrets,
Right, of course.
so
In
it
general, in general.
no, I don't really care a whole lot about like keeping secrets. There's a lot that goes in it. So I have a questionnaire usually that I ask people that first approach me, and it's simple stuff like, why do you think this animal caused the attack? Right? What do you have evidence? If it's a fresh kill, I'll go out on site and look at it myself and look at all that stuff myself. Um, that hasn't, that happens more often not in like in any time that's not the summer in the valley, because the summer in the valley distorts things a lot. So um but there's that aspect of it. There is I've got the questionnaire. I've got, like, looking at the local, especially now, wildfires, and if anything pushes that down. If I can find the kill with the landowner's permission, usually we can shave it and look at attack patterns or footprints nearby, and you can skin it if you want to skin it and look at what under the skin, what happened. So it kind of depends on what's available to you to investigate. A lot of the things that I find, at least, is I get emails saying like, oh well, coyotes killed my sheep or whatever, and you walk on the site, and more often than not, that animal died from other causes. It's just coyotes have scavenged it, right? So of course it's a dead animal that's staying there for 1 or 2 days. It smells, and that causes a lot of animals to come over and have a look. So um, I don't have, like, my reports don't have any official way to them, and that's something that I tell people, like, straight off the bat, is like, I cannot, tell you whether or not. Well, I can tell you what my opinion is, but in order for you to go through the official channels, you need to talk to official, state agents and stuff like that. But so far I haven't been wrong, so that's
Right.
good, right?
That
And
helps.
yeah, and more often than not, it's just a case of talking to the people, and sometimes it's just seeing what they think versus what they want,
Right.
right? So there's a lot of people that will tell you, oh well, I know it's coyotes because I keep hearing them every night, and I keep hearing them really close to my house, and so I might walk over there and I might just say, you know what, there's no evidence that a coyote did any of this, right? But if you're worried about a coyote, let's talk about what your options are, right? Let's talk about what you're fully legal, because I only operate legally, right? So all the
Mhm.
legal options that are out there, and here's all your full legal options, and here's what I think you should do, because this is what I know from science works best.
Right.
So
So I've got to ask then,
mhm,
should normal people who, like, we're building a house in the woods,
right.
okay, in PEI, 7 acres of woods. I don't know if there's coyote activity. I'm going to set up some trail cams because I'm totally going to nerd out on that,
Nice,
on
yeah.
that stuff. Um, if I do spot some coyotes, is there something I can do as a homeowner to, kind of deter them?
I mean, do you want to deter them?
Should I?
Are you worried about, like, your dog or your cat, or you just, like, not want them around the house for whatever reason? Because,
I
like,
guess that's the best question to ask then. Is there a reason for homeowners to be scared of coyotes?
I don't think so. Like,
Okay.
the only things that I think you ought to be cautious about is, yeah, if you let your dogs out to go potty at night, right? So, and that kind of thing, then yeah, absolutely. If you live in any area that shares the land with predators, you need to make a conscious decision. Go out with a flashlight, scan the area a little bit, like walk around for a minute before you let your dog out or whatever. But I think a lot of people, and I tell these to people, and more often than not, I am justified just by the trail cam footage. I'm like, you think your backyard is barren and nobody uses it, but I bet you that if you put a trail camera out there, you will at least you'll catch a coyote within a month, like guaranteed. If you're in coyote country, they'll swing by. Like, they're not afraid to do it. And so you just have to either come to terms with that, or if you don't, think about how much of your effort, like, just purely time management wise, like, what part of your day do you want to devote to keeping these animals away from your backyard for whatever reason? Now, if you've got chickens or anything else that you're like, I don't want the animals nearby because I don't want them getting ideas, right? That's a different, obviously a different scenario, because yeah, there are things that you can do to keep them at bay. It's a lot of work. So it's just a matter of like, do you want to do that, or do you just want to build a chicken coop, electrify the chicken coop, put the chickens in, every night or when they're unattended, just put them in there and then sleep soundly 99% of the time,
Right.
right? So
Is that, when I've heard you say already electrify a few times. Is
mhm.
that one of the main methods for deterring predators?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely like a foolproof, but almost foolproof. Nothing is foolproof when it comes to coyotes, but it's almost a foolproof method, right? It's if you have the means and the equipment to put out some sort of electricity enclosure, you can be pretty sure and confident that as long as there's no gaps, or the animals can't obviously jump over them at ease or whatever, that you won't get any sort of depredation. And that's because it zaps them, and it doesn't feel good, and it's not a feeling that you can overcome, right? So I talked about the landscape of fear and this idea behind the psyche of it. So the reason what I do for the most part is I make the predators uncomfortable, right? I don't try and shoo them away. I just say, okay, you know what? While you're in this area, you're worried about your life, right? Not necessarily because I'm actually going to kill you, but because you think someone's going to kill you. You think there's someone out there that you don't want to be around with. So, yeah, you're going to use the area nonetheless, because they will, but they're going to be fast about it. They're just going to go in and out. They're going to be very cautious. A single noise will just get them running away and stuff like that. And so that is ultimately the best result.
Right.
Um,
It's funny because, where I'm from in the north, we weren't so much scared of coyotes. You would see them on a trail cam or
mhm,
crossing a field across the street or whatever, but you didn't really encounter them. The thing that northerners are mostly scared of are bears. Bears can be pretty scary when they have their cubs with them. It's not something you wanna make some noise when you're walking, taking a
mhm.
hike in the forest. You wanna have something, a whistle, something to just scare them off. Um, and I guess, sometimes I wonder, is that fear because, we've heard stories from grandpa and great grandpa and all that stuff, and we've read it in the books, and we've seen a million predator movies that are just kind of outlandish to a certain extent. How do you manage that people's fear versus reality?
My first bear encounter was a bear with a cub. That
Wow.
was really funny. Yeah. My first, like, oh shit, that's a bear encounter was a bear with a cub. Um, it's a really interesting, you know, thing to talk about, at least in my opinion, for people, because there's a lot of evidence out there. At least there's an old saying that if you've walked in the forest, like the cat's seen you, but you might not have seen the cat, right? Or something. I'm paraphrasing it, but it's like a very similar thing. And I tell people, if you've hiked anywhere in California that is mountain lion country, I can guarantee you that a mountain lion has seen you, right? And you might go your entire life not seeing one. I think we hype up these animals so much because we do hear these stories, and obviously, like with social media now, we get more and more of these stories fed to us. Instantly someone gets attacked in a county in the middle of nowhere that no one's ever heard of. It becomes national news, right? Or the people that you are interested in, or the people that you have in your social bubbles on like any sort of social media might share it, and so it might spread. Um, so you gotta just sit down and think about it and say like, okay, how much of this is just sensationalism? How much of it is just because they're reporting something because there's something to report, right? Um, it just the reality of it is that if you take some precautions, you're very unlikely to like have any sort of issues, especially when it comes to black bears and mountain lions and that kind of stuff. Like grizzlies are a different ball game altogether, right? And polar bears as well and that kind of stuff. But um, I think like there's definitely issues with bears, especially habituated bears. Like you can't go out there and say you're like, oh no one's been attacked by a bear, and the same goes for mountain lions, right? But I think those are statistical anomalies in like the millions of people that are out there in the woods every day, enjoying nature and being in close proximity to these animals without them knowing it. I have footage of people using a trail, and there's a coyote, watching them go by, and they don't even notice the coyote as they go by. And this was like 30 feet away from them. Just the coyotes tucked in a bush in front of my camera, right? And the people just keep on walking, and nothing happens. And we have this idea that nature is out to get us because I think primordially that's what we were used to, when we were back when things were actually out to get us. But I just think is like it's not very common. I also think Americans in particular, like all North Americans, not just like the U.S. citizens, but everyone kind of enjoys this feeling. I think maybe it's a Western world thing now that I'm thinking about it, but everyone wants to instinctually have the woods be wild, right? I think everyone wants to be like, oh, you need to be careful when you're walking out there. Like I've hiked on a property, and we came across like a fresh deer kill, right? Like super fresh, maybe an hour long, and people were like, "Oh, this is really worrying and stuff." I'm like, "Why?" Like, we'll just walk away, leave it alone, and whatever killed it is going to come back and eat it, and then we'll just keep going our way. Like, the predator that has made that kill is not hungry anymore, right? And there's also five of us walking in a group, making noise, talking. Like, unless if it's a rabid animal, there's nothing to worry about. So I think there's this instinctual need to make the wild scarier and wilder than it is. And I'm not sure exactly, like, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know where that comes from. But I noticed that a lot with people, fairly, not sterile, but like fairly easygoing habitats that, you don't need to worry much about like walking around in oak chaparral forest, right? You can see everything around you and stuff like that. And people are like, oh, you better look up on the trees because there might be mountain lions up on the trees waiting to drop down on you. And just, you know, it's a very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, you nailed it though, because I gotta tell you, especially in Canada, we love feeling like we're part of this dangerous, wild,
Mhm.
mountain or lake kind of, environment. My partner who's from the East Coast, and she was like, "You don't need to feel wild in the bush." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm gonna get myself a new hunting knife and da 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 da." And it's like this thing that's this alpha thing that's built into me. It's like in my genes. I don't know where that's from, but definitely maybe it's because I'm from a hunting and fishing family. So we're also the predators, right? Ourselves as humans. In North America, there's a lot of hunting.
Mhm.
Fishing is different, perhaps, but definitely when you're from a hunting family, you tend to see yourself as more of this kind of wilderness folk kind of thing. I don't know how to describe it.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely it. I also think that you know, I mean, there's how that aspect of it. I also think that there's the aspect of like you have a very selective memory, right? So if you go on 5,000 hikes and you never feel in danger for any single one of them, you remember them as, oh, we went on this nice hike. There was a nice view, right? You go on one of them and, a bear pops out from the bush like 30 feet away from you. Instantly, that hike out of the 5,000 hikes is going to be the one hike where you're like, oh, you better be careful, or you better do this, or this what happened to me one time, right? And I know this because I tell my stories, like, my bear encounter and the mountain lions that I heard, like, talking to each other and stuff, and those are the ones that stay with you. Like the hikes that I do almost on a monthly basis to go check my cameras, where nothing eventful happens, are just like, yeah, I walked up to my cameras, I checked the cameras, I went back home, the end, right?
Right.
It Nothing happens, so you don't remember them as vividly. So you don't remember how many of those you've done versus the one that you did where you're like, oh my god, you want me to
You
turn
did
on the lights?
say. Yeah.
It's getting dark. Hang on, I'll be right
It's
back.
it's okay. It's kind of funny now that we're recording video, so, we're just gonna let him go and turn on the lights because there we go, California time's probably getting a little later over there, um, but we'll
Yeah,
resume in just a moment here.
that's the
Uh,
one.
that's okay, I'm not even gonna edit this out, this is just raw podcasting here. But, you mentioned grizzly bears and polar bears are a different breed. What did you
Hmm.
mean by that? Are they actually, animals that you should be careful with?
So I don't like. I mean, we should preface this in saying that I don't really have a whole lot of experience, right, with
Yes,
either
of
of the
course.
species. I've had experience in brown bear country in Greece, where I did some surveys, which is brown bears are related to grizzly bears, and so there's the same thing, but they think they behave more like black-ish bears in Europe. But yeah, they're a different breed in terms of they're much more aggressive in terms of defending what they have. You mentioned black bears. You should be scared of them when they have cubs, but the reality is that even if they have cubs, most black bears will run away from you unless if you catch them unaware, right? So if it's a mother and a cub and they see you coming, they're not gonna like the mom's not gonna bluff up and start charging you and stuff. They're gonna walk away. They're gonna run away if they have the opportunity. Whereas with grizzlies, my understanding is that there's a lot more of a dynamic going on there. They're a much bigger animal. They know they're a much bigger animal. They push wolves off kills. They do all these sort of things. So they're naturally not going to be very intimidated by a human. And so it's a different dynamic in that regards, in that they know that um, they can do damage, and they know that they can intimidate you more than you intimidate them. So
Right.
there's a different dynamic in terms of the woods and who should be scared of who in that regard.
Yeah, I would definitely be scared of polar bears if I was up north. That's 100%. I would be terrified of them.
I've only heard stories from friends who have interacted with like polar bears or been near polar bears and stuff like that. It's a different situation, right?
Yeah, that's
You
for
need to
sure.
like pay attention to your surroundings and all that. But yeah,
Yeah, I guess there's a reason too that they carry guns in the Arctic,
yeah,
I
yeah,
suppose.
definitely.
Well, I mean, this has been a lot of fun. I wanna nerd out with you a little bit here and
Hmm.
not talk about wildlife. We're gonna talk about a subject entirely different, just because I like to do that sometimes. You mentioned D&D
Hmm.
when before we started recording that you're into D&D, which is really cool because it's something that I was into when I was very, very young, and I'd like to get back into. When did your interest with D&D start, and, what keeps you going?
I was 17, and I actually started with World of Darkness. So it was like Vampire, the Requiem, Werewolf, the Forsaken, and stuff like that. And that was what drew me into it, was like this sort of like gothic horror and stuff like that. And one of my friends we role played together was like, hey, you should also try like Dungeons and Dragons. It's a classic, right? And so yeah, we said, okay, we'll try Dungeons and Dragons. So we tried that. I've played a lot of different role playing games since then, and it's just a very interesting thing. I like tabletop games. I like playing a lot of board games, and so this is just that with a lot of improv added to it, and
Right.
like a lot of like social interaction that you don't necessarily get from board games. It's more of a cooperative storytelling if done right, right, rather than
Yes. I
rather
always tell
than
people, because there's a lot of misconceptions about D&D.
hmm
There's a lot, especially in the 80s and 90s, people were
yeah,
terrified of
the
people who play
Satanic
D&D.
Panic and that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, all that stuff, but I always try to tell people, it's not for socially awkward, it's actually for social people because you have to interact with each other, and I find that it helps people with decision making, problem solving,
yeah.
creativity, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of avenues to it. It's been used now to in schools successfully to like try and get kids with like different social so kids that lack social skills, like try and get them to like increase those social skills. And there's a lot more to it when you read it, and when you play it, and you understand that there's like not only is this a great outlet for adults to get together and play, but it can be used constructively if you know what you're doing, if you're a professional or whatever, to get something out of it from different people, which I think is great, in and of itself. And um, I know there's programs for like at-risk kids, that focus on D&D and focus on getting them to do that stuff. There's Dungeons and Dragons in prison. Like I saw a whole documentary about it on Vice. I think maybe it was Vice, but it was talking about how they were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and how you get away from certain things because they're not allowed to have dice in certain prison complexes because it's gambling. so they had to try and figure out how to do, rolling for it and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And there's a lot of culture, and now we're getting a lot more spotlight in things like that. It's no longer considered like the stigma that it was before, so people are getting more exposed to it. And yeah,
Right.
I think it's a great, hobby to get in. It requires some money in the beginning, but also like not a whole lot. So also can be relatively cheap if you want to share the costs with friends. And
Well, I mean, compared to becoming a hockey player or, doing anything else, PS5 is much more expensive than,
oh yeah, all the books
than
combined.
playing D&D. No, I
Yeah,
think it's really cool.
I mean, and that's a really cool aspect of it, right? Is you can buy the books and share them with your friends. You don't have to like
Yeah.
doesn't everyone have to have the books. And it could be really improvised. You can just be like, hey, come over and we can have like, I know there's groups that like drink heavily and play because they enjoy like the shenanigans that comes from like playing drunk, right? And I know other groups that are like, no, this is very serious role playing. We're going to get into character. We're only going to be talking to character. And so there's like all this different spectrum in terms of what you want to get out of this game that is essentially like the same rules for everyone, right? Um, but then, you have people that sit down and build elaborate settings with like, every inch of the world finely detailed. And then you have other people that are like, I don't know, it's a city called City. Who cares, right? And
Yes.
so you get all these different spectrums of people, and somehow a lot of people mesh with each other. So you get people, everyone meshing together and being like, okay, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do a funny campaign that where everyone's just gonna act silly and funny, or whatever, or really evil one where we go around killing everyone we find, or whatever. Like it's just this all like outlet of imagination that you get through it. So yeah.
I would imagine too, just with a few minutes left here,
Hmm.
I would imagine that, like you said earlier, sometimes you have to go investigate animal death.
Hmm.
You go to a farm, there's dead animals,
Hmm.
sometimes shredded apart by an animal, sometimes whatever. Um, Playing D&D must be a good way to cope with that kind of stuff. I would imagine your science degree didn't prepare you to look at shredded up animals.
I mean, it in my upbringing, death has always been like part of my life, in terms of like, we were taught really early on to like accept death for what it is. So like that part doesn't bother me, but it definitely has helped with creative process, right? So in both ways, interestingly enough, my job has helped me put information into my role playing games that aren't necessarily something that everyone thinks about. And the other way around is that, the role playing games have definitely like, one of the really cool things is if you are the games master and you put this puzzle forward for people to solve, right? And you're like, this is in your head, this is how you solve the puzzle, and then your players find a completely different way to solve the puzzle, and you're like, holy shit, how did you guys figure that out? Like, this is
Yeah.
insane. And that actually comes back to my job, because like coyotes in particular are notoriously smart animals. You like, I will always say this, no matter what, it's like there's no predictable way to deter a coyote. There
Hmm.
are tools in your toolbox, and some of those will work, and some of those might work perfectly, but they won't work forever because these animals adapt. So you gotta stay on top of it. You gotta think outside the box. You gotta introduce a lot of things. You gotta do all these sort of things, and um, interacting with other humans and seeing how they solve certain scenarios that you think can only be solved in one of five ways, and they introduce a sixth, seventh, and eighth way, right? Gets you to be a lot more understanding of how other people think. And I think ultimately that's like a big part of it, is that you're introducing some diversity in terms of the way you're thinking into your table, and that, in my experience, has translated to my field skills. So
Yeah, that's,
yeah,
really, really, really neat.
yeah,
I love that. I love it, and I especially love that little, tidbit about the coyotes.
yeah.
I wish we had more time, but I'm gonna have
Hmm.
to call it, quits now. But, listen, Petros, I wish you all the best.
Uh-huh.
I have to say I'm really proud of you for being, a science guy who went into industry. I interview a lot of academic, scientists,
Uh-huh.
and I don't get to hear the voices of the people who didn't stay in academia and just went
Yeah.
into industry. So it's kind of interesting to hear your perspective on things. So I wish you all the best, and, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show.
Thank you.